Hello, friend, and welcome back to another episode of Artworks for Teachers. I'm your host, Susan Riley, and we're in January 2024 at the time of this recording, which means it's a new year. And even though we're midway through the school year, even at the turn of the calendar, it still feels fresh and vibrant and new. And oftentimes we're talking about changes that we want to make. So in today's episode, I actually brought on a change maker himself, Anthony Muhammad, who talks about how to make systemic change, school change in the midst of very challenging cultural differences. So by cultural differences, I mean school climate issues. So if you are in a school where it is a challenge right now to get yourself out of bed, to go to work because it's just so filled with negativity, I think this episode is really going to be helpful for you because Anthony talks deeply about trust and change and what makes it so difficult, as well as solutions to work our way through it and out of it. So that you know, Dr. Anthony Muhammad is one of the most sought after educational consultants in North America. As a longtime practitioner, Dr. Muhammad has served as a middle school teacher, assistant principal, middle school principal, and high school principal. His tenure as a practitioner has earned him several awards as both a teacher and a principal, but his most notable accomplishment came as the principal at Levy Heights Middle School in Southfield, Michigan, a national school of excellence, where school proficiency on state assessments was more than doubled in 5 years, and Dr. Muhammad was named the Michigan Middle School's Principal of the Year in 2005. So I hope that you'll enjoy this episode. I think you're going to find some great nuggets to take with you moving forward. And if you are a teacher, I would love to see you share this with a leader friend because I know that for myself as a leader of a team, this episode was amazingly helpful. So I know that the leaders in your life would appreciate this as well. So here we go. All right, so clearly you're an advocate for systemic change, but my question for you, one of them, is oftentimes when I walk into schools, I hear teachers talk about all this change is happening all the time, and it doesn't seem to get them anywhere, and they get really frustrated. So how do we know as leaders when we need to change or when we maybe don't need to change? How do we know that?
Okay. Well, one of the synonyms I use for the term change in my literature is a disruption.
Mhm.
Change by nature is disruptive and it's uncomfortable. And it creates a dilemma in life. I mean, most of our decisions are based upon how disruptive will that decision be.
Mhm.
So, one of the ironies of life is that everybody loves improvement, but not everybody loves change. I mean,
Mm.
it's kind of an irony.
Yeah.
We'd love to have a growing bank account, but still spend frivolously. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't have both. So one of the things that leaders have to do is to be intentional about change. Whenever you change something, it will be uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And that goes back to the first skill in our time for change framework
Mhm.
is that people tend to be less reluctant about change if they know why it's necessary.
Yes.
And why is directly connected to communication.
Mhm.
If I just order you right now to close this podcast and run for the hills, you probably look at me like, what's wrong with this nut? But if I saw a fire behind you and I said, oh my God, the fire is closing in on you, you need to run,
Mhm.
you wouldn't care about running into the elements because the disruption was worth your sacrifice. So
Yes.
when leaders simply order people to change
Mhm.
without any connection to logic or rationale or engage them in an intellectual standpoint, it seems like a misuse of authority.
Mm.
Now,
Yes.
what I have to also address with teachers is that you can't make the argument that if our evidence doesn't show us that we're highly successful in an area, that you are justified in continuing with that same behavior. So
Mm.
they try to make often change the enemy. Change is the gateway to improvement, but it
Mhm.
needs to be the right change for the right reason and done collectively and strategically. So the answer to we change too much can't be leave me alone and let me close my door and do
Mm.
what I darn well please, because in many cases that's the case. It's not, we call it irrational resistance. It's trying to make a case to be left alone. Well,
Mhm.
if I can make a case that what we've been doing, whether we're looking at disproportionality in suspensions, if we're looking at overrepresentation in special ed,
Mhm.
if we're looking at stagnation in literacy or numeracy, a leader has an obligation to make a logical case that the pathway that we're on is not leading us towards the target or the excellence that we strive for. So therefore, we need to take a different direction. And this is why this direction is more logical than what we've been doing.
Mhm.
Now, I'd like to add as I close, I am perfectly fine with teachers and others disagreeing with the leader's position.
Mhm.
Now, what they can't argue with is the evidence. If we're looking at the special ed classes and they're 90% boys and 90% boys of color, then you can't argue with the need to change.
Yep.
But you can propose an alternative to what's being proposed.
Mhm.
So you can disagree with me, Susan. All I'd ask you to do is to provide a more evidence based, more logical alternative.
I love
And
that.
that's where power struggle leaves the equation. We're
Yes.
not disagreeing about the fact that there's something that needs to improve. We're disagreeing on how we change and
Yes.
what direction we go. And that's an evidence-based disagreement as opposed to a power struggle. I
Yes.
understand teachers' frustrations,
Yeah.
but they also understand leaders' frustrations.
Mhm.
The days of letting teachers close their door and do that whole thing, trust the teacher. What does that even mean? I want a doctor who has a track record of excellence and track record of success.
Mhm.
I just don't blanket trust doctors.
Mm.
I'll trust evidence, I'll
Mhm.
trust track record. And if you have a bad track record, then no, I don't trust you. Yeah,
Mm.
trust has to be earned. So
Yes.
the assumption that I know best just because I'm a teacher or just because I'm a principal or superintendent is what undermines the credibility of our professional respect
Mm.
that often suffers in the public and suffers among parents. Trust has to be earned.
Woo. I mean, so many gems in what you just shared, and I
Thank you.
really kind of want to pick out a couple of them to focus on just a minute. You said that change has to be worth the effort.
Mm-hmm.
So, what if a teacher doesn't agree with the how
Mm-hmm.
that has been proposed,
Mm-hmm.
or
That's
administrators
perfectly
don't
fine.
agree, right? And that's totally fine because the effort, perhaps, to make that change does not align,
Mm-hmm.
or the how doesn't align, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you select? What if a teacher comes to you and says, I have an evidence-based solution that I would like us to try, and it's the evidence is even with what you proposed. How
That's
do you
that. That's
select
a
then the
that's
one?
a great dilemma to have. First of
Mhm.
all, because you have two well-intentioned, ethical people
Yes.
with different ideologies about how to address a commonly accepted problem.
Mhm.
My simple response would be that's create two pilots.
Mm.
Have that teacher and her team or his team try whatever evidence-based methodology. Because when we say evidence-based, the best we can do is produce a hypothesis
Yes.
that the evidence shows, whatever evidence I've gathered, that this is more likely to be effective than that.
Mhm.
But you don't know until you engage into it in an experiment.
Yes.
So why not let the third grade try Lee Cantor's progressive discipline
Mhm.
and let the fourth grade try PBIS? Because the goal is positive impact on student behavior.
Yes.
So why not allow in a professional environment people to try out professional theories and then come back objectively in a semester or after a year and look at the impact. And
Mhm.
if your way works best, I am so grateful. Thank you for speaking up and providing an alternative perspective.
Yep.
We're going to have the whole school use Cantor.
Mhm.
But if my way works best, I'm expecting the same level of professionalism and humility because ultimately that's a test of
Mhm.
how we really feel about our impact on kids.
Yes. Yes, and I think that's fantastic, and I wish more people, both administrators and teachers, would be willing to
Mhm.
allow for that kind of evidence-based test to occur. Oftentimes I'll hear that we don't have time for that. I don't have time to run an experiment because we're working on test scores. And I think that all
which
gets lost,
which
right?
has been which have been stagnant since 2001.
Exactly.
So we're too busy being ineffective as opposed to being more methodical and
Hmm.
more pragmatic and testing theories. I hate the term research and evidence based
Hmm.
because they're misused. The
Yes.
best evidence is how it affects your students.
Mm.
When you look at meta analyses and studies, you have often no idea of the sample that they're using, the methodology, the extraneous conditions.
Mhm.
That can give you some insight on what's more likely to work or not. But you don't know ultimately until you do action research in your own environment.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's why I think micro credentials are so helpful,
Mm-hmm.
because they are based around action research. It's not
Mm-hmm.
sitting and getting.
Mm-hmm.
It's learn what the process is and put it into place in your classroom and see what you get.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to go back to you said trust teachers. What is that? And I
Mm-hmm.
want to clarify because I don't want people to misunderstand
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying there. I think I understand what you
Mm-hmm.
meant by that in that you rather than blanket statement, trust
Mm-hmm.
all teachers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If there is evidence that that they've been using and that they are effective teachers,
Mm-hmm.
you would trust them, right?
Absolutely. But
Yes.
the blanket statement that it makes the assumption that all teachers are homogeneous,
Mm,
and they're not. We're
yes.
talking about hundreds of thousands of American teachers.
Hmm.
Uh, we hear of teachers doing miracles and helping kids grow several years in a year.
Hmm.
We also see headlines of teachers sleeping with kids
Yes.
or physically abusing kids.
Yeah.
We need to take that out of our vocabulary.
Mm,
I trust your evidence.
mm,
I trust your intentions. I can give you the benefit of the doubt,
yes.
but blanket trust without verification is just foolish.
Hmm.
Just like you shouldn't just trust every administrator or
Right.
trust every superintendent. Trust is something that's built,
Yes.
it's something that is tangible. And that's the second key behavior in our framework for leaders.
Hmm.
Teachers can't follow leaders they don't trust. And
Mm,
trust is something that has to be built through a
mhm.
demonstration of certain behavior over a protracted period of time.
Absolutely. And I really think that is the key where we're missing some things right now, particularly in our schools
Mm-hmm.
after COVID. The trust factor
Mm-hmm.
has been decimated a
Mm-hmm.
bit on both sides. And
Mm-hmm.
people are not are weary of
Mm-hmm.
trust, and moving forward in that. And so my question, another one that I have for you is I would love for some specific examples of strategies that you can use to solve problems when there's negativity or doubt or maybe
Mm-hmm.
mistrust,
Mm-hmm.
that's prevalent in the school.
Yeah. Well, in the book, Dr. Cruz and I break down trust. Trust is a very complex construct.
Hmm.
And one of the things that makes it complex is that it's abstract.
Yes.
So let me give you a scenario. Let's say both of us are teachers in a school. You're brand new, you just finished your student teaching,
Hmm.
you don't have a set of experiences to base your interactions with. I'm a 22-year veteran. I've been through 8 principals, some benevolent, some who are dictators, some that are collaborative, some that are autocratic. So my ability to trust has been compromised by my experiences, both good and bad. So a leader walks into that situation with 40, 50, 60 people with very different emotional experiences. So trust for you may happen a lot quicker than trust for me based upon my personal experience. So that's why Dr. Cruz and I agree that of the 4 leadership skills that produce a culture of change and progress, trust is the most challenging
Mm,
because the nature of trust is challenging. Communication is based upon logic. And
mhm.
logic is very concrete. We even have classes we offer in college on logic. I mean, logic has a structure to it.
Right.
There's evidence, there's the case, even the practicality of professional support, the how
Mm-hmm.
is much more practical. Even accountability is much more practical. But
Mm-hmm.
trust is pretty abstract. So what we try to do is to make trust much more concrete. And we break it down into two critical elements to build trust actively.
Okay.
Number one is empathy. So empathy doesn't mean that I agree with you. Empathy means that I hear you, I see you, and I validate your experience. So a principal that comes in, and I'm a veteran that's been through 9 principals, that new principal didn't go through that, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
But to acknowledge what I've been through, to try to understand my perspective, and that could include listening, active listening. That could include trying to validate where I've come from, even if I disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Consider it like a customer service agent. When you call a customer service line and you're flabbergasted, you're not, that agent didn't do anything to you. But what it can do is it can help calm you emotionally if that person has an empathetic ear and tries to validate your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that helps anybody trust is to know that the person cares about their experience. I like how Simon Sinek said.
Mm-hmm.
Simon Sinek said, empathy is when you ask someone how they're doing, you actually care about the answer.
Yes.
It's validate. That's what therapists do. And that's something that leaders can just listen. But the second part of that is a lot less emotional, and that is credibility that is built over a protracted period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Some use the term consistency,
Mm-hmm.
but I like the term credibility. To me, gravity has a lot of credibility. I don't have to like it, I don't have to be in love with it, but if I drop my water bottle, I'm pretty certain of gravity's response. So people get caught up in is inconsistency and illogical behavior where I don't have to like you to trust you, but I have to know that you're credible and reliable. So if I know that, Susan, you're a staunch student advocate, and I know whether I like your decisions or not, I can trust that they're always going to be rooted in what's best for kids, even if it's slightly inconvenient for me. Now,
Mm-hmm.
over time, that might not make me fall in love with you. But what it will do is it'll make me trust you. One of the things that Max Weber pointed out in his research in organizational theory is that one of the greatest goals of a leader is to reduce uncertainty. One of the things that teachers are suffering from emotionally is that there's no certainty. During COVID, we went from Zoom to face, to mask, no mask, start, stop. The volatility of that environment creates emotional anxiety, but it also erodes trust. When
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what's going to happen day to day, then that person is an agent in your own anxiety. Teachers tend to trust people who they know care about their well being and are principled people who are consistent and credible in the principles in which they articulate. And if leaders could do that, don't worry about being liked,
Mm-hmm.
worry about being trusted.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to like you to trust you. I'd like to like you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more important that I trust you. It means that I can go into the battle with this person and I can predict and know they have my best interest and the best interest of the mission at heart. And of the 4 skills, that takes the longest to build,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the most abstract and the most complex.
I mean, I'm blown away because you've hit the nail on the head exactly with where I think people are right now in schools and why they're so frustrated, but
Mm-hmm,
also an avenue to moving out of that. And that's
mm-hmm,
been missing from this conversation for a long time as a solution to move forward out of the negativity and how to do that together. And I think one element that we're not talking about today, but that probably And I could see this definitely fitting into the framework you just shared, is the relationships between teachers and parents and administrators and parents. And again, using trust as credibility and empathy for both parties in order for all of us to come onto the same page. I think that's just fantastic. We're running short on time, so I did want to go over you talked about the trust pillar. What are
Mhm.
the other skills that are essential
Okay.
for transformational change?
Okay. I'll go over the four, give it people sequentially.
Okay.
The first one is making a logical, we call it a meeting of the minds.
Hmm.
That's the why. When people's intellectual curiosities are not quenched and they're just ordered to do something, there's a natural apprehension that emerges. So leaders that are able to create a meeting of the minds through communication. Communication to me, is the most essential leadership skill
Mm,
because I can't read your mind and you can't read mine.
right.
If we're going to be synergized, I have to be transparent in any relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's a parental relationship. Communication just creates this shared understanding
Hmm.
that allows us to move forward. So that's the first one, communication.
Hmm.
Number two is building trust. And building trust is, I call a connection of the heart. It means that I get where you're coming from, but I don't know if I trust you yet,
Mm,
ethically, morally, personally. So that's that building trust. That's number two.
hmm.
Three is building capacity.
Okay.
Person knows why they need to do it. They trust me, but they don't know how to do it. Dr. Cruz and I agreed that this is the lowest hanging of all the fruit.
Mm,
And with effort and attention can be addressed relatively quickly. I like to impress upon leaders who are listening that it is unfair to ask somebody to do something that they don't know how to do.
yeah.
I hear all the time, well, just use the data to drive your instruction. What does that even mean?
Right.
Make your lessons culturally responsive. Do you know how hard culturally responsive teaching is?
Yes.
I hear, well, just differentiate. Differentiated instruction is tough.
Yeah.
I mean, Carol Ann Tomlinson has written volumes of books on differentiation. So the third pillar is to be mindful of the tools in your teacher's toolbox to actually execute that function. That can include training, time, resources, support. So we found that when people know why they need to do something, they trust the people that are leading them,
Hmm.
and they know how to do it, that for most people, that's enough.
Hmm.
But there's a fourth pillar for what I call the over my dead body people. Dr. Cruz calls them cave people, colleagues against virtually everything.
Hmm.
We call that form of resistance irrational.
Hmm.
They get it, trust isn't an issue, and they know how. This is where they come in. You can't make me.
Mm,
That, at that point, is a challenge of authority or power. So at some point, if you've made all of these investments in communication, building trust, training, infrastructure, technology, at some point, any good investor has to expect a return on investment.
hmm.
So I'd like to ask some of the leaders who are listening to rethink the concept of accountability.
Mm,
Don't look at accountability as the leveraging of authority. Look at it as an expectation of a return on investment.
mm,
It doesn't have to be malicious. It doesn't have to be confrontational. If I've given you everything you need to be successful in this very essential change that I'm asking everybody to participate in,
mhm,
I need to figure out how I'm going to gather evidence that you've been engaged. And for most people, they don't mind because they're engaged. It's
mm,
the small group of people who just refuse. Now I'm using the evidence. What part of this is an expectation didn't you get?
mm,
Do you not understand?
mhm,
Is it trust? Is it capacity? It can't be that because 98% of your colleagues are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, you think you're special. And you are at this point because you're going to get all of my attention. Because you can't give me a reasonable explanation about why you just challenge my authority.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the sad part. I have more authority. And at this point, I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
And if you don't want me to use my authority, then engage like everybody else.
Mm.
We found that I found in my Transforming School Culture study, there were leaders who got right to that door and stopped.
Mm.
And their inactivity allowed anyone else who was voluntarily engaged to voluntarily disengage.
Yes.
Todd Whitaker said, an organization's culture is shaped by the worst behavior a leader is willing to tolerate.
Yeah. So true. That was, and I remember back in my training days as an administrator, that was when you got to that part, that pillar part, that was when my administrators was like, that's why they pay you the big bucks.
Mm-hmm.
That's why
Yep.
you sit in that chair,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to make those hard decisions. And that's a heavy cape to wear sometimes, but
Yep.
sometimes necessary.
Exactly. And it really comes down, it's your ultimate challenge or test to your rhetoric about how much you care about kids.
Yes.
That when the rubber hits the road, are you really willing to change your behavior?
Yeah.
And if you're a leader, demand that others. And along the way, you've given people a chance to give input. You listen to their concerns. You've dealt with trust issues. You've made investments. So, our golden rule, if you get a chance to read Time for Change, is
Yes.
that support has to come before accountability.
Mm.
Accountability is the natural result of support.
Yes.
But you can't demand if you haven't provided the resources and the means to engage. But it's
Absolutely.
also ridiculous to make all that investment and not expect a return on your investment.
Yeah. Absolutely. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I've learned so much as a leader of an
Thank you.
organization, just from you in this
Thank
short
you.
period of time. I want everybody out there to go get your book, Time for Change. We'll put a link to it in our show notes, so make sure you go grab that. Where can people get your book and stay in touch with you?
Well, the books are on all the platforms. My publisher is Solution Tree.
Okay.
So if you go to Solution Tree's website, you can get that directly. And all my other books. I do have a new book coming out in February
All right.
called The Way Forward. And
Excellent.
it's about school struggle to move into full PLC commitment
Mm-hmm.
and an extension of Rick DeFore's work.
Wonderful.
And Learning by Doing, which most are familiar with, is the Handbook for PLC. The
Yep.
fourth edition will be out in May. And myself, Mike Meadows, Bob Aker, and Tom Maney revamped that book. It's one of the highest selling education books of all time.
Yeah.
And the fourth edition will be out in May. So The
Wonderful.
Way Forward, which is my new book, comes out in February. Fourth edition of Learning by Doing comes out in May. So I got two new books coming out this year. But
Right.
Time for Change, of all the books I've written, it's the most practical. And
That's
you can go to Solution Tree's website, you go to Amazon, any place that
great.
sells books. Um, I've had a I've had a streak going. Every book I've had a chance to write has been a bestseller.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty much any platform you go to any book reseller will have that book.
Absolutely. And we'll put the links to all of those books, including your upcoming ones, into those
Thank
show
you.
notes.
Thank you.
How can
Thank
people
you.
stay in touch with you?
Social media, Facebook under Dr. Anthony Muhammad,
Great.
Twitter or X, whatever it's called now,
Yes.
at New Frontier 21. And
Great.
those are the two primary. I don't get much into Instagram, or I'm on LinkedIn too
Great.
under Dr. Anthony Muhammad. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. I haven't got to the I don't get the Instagram thing yet.
That is okay. As a
Yeah.
90s baby, it's all right.
Yes,
It's
yes, yes.
okay.
Yeah.
That is all right. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
This
you.
has been an absolute joy.
Thank you. And thanks for your audience for listening, and all the educators out there. Thanks for what you do. But our journey's not done. We got a long way to go.
That's right.
Thank you.